Hi everyone, I'm Jean LaFleur, the co-founder and CEO of Airbyte. Welcome to our lightning interview with Chetan Putagunta about the future evolution of the data stack. Chetan is the general partner at Benchmark. He was on the board of MuleSoft and MongoDB, and he's now the chairman at Elastic. So we can safely say that he knows a lot about the data industry and open source. And he also should have a good vision about the potential evolution of the data industry. Welcome, Chetan, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So I've got my first question for you would be if you could give us your view of the macro trends in data.
Yeah, of course. I think one of the interesting things that, of course, all of Airbyte's users know about, but at a macro level, I think most people are not quite aware of how big the data warehousing market has become. In 2019, the estimates range from 15 to $20 billion of total spend going into data warehouses. You're seeing that grow roughly anywhere between 10 to 15% per annum. And so if things go the way they're anticipated to go, you're going to see the data warehouse market reach somewhere on the order of $50 billion in the next 5 to 7 years. I think one of the things that's really interesting that's happening is as that movement and that market takes over enterprise spend, the needs of enterprise customers, startups, mid-market customers are all evolving in real time. And so from a macro perspective, I think what's super interesting right now is thinking about all the needs of all the different types of customers as the data warehousing market really expands right now. And the way the data warehousing market is transforming itself is particularly interesting. Perhaps 10 years ago, maybe even longer, a data warehouse was largely something that you would buy coupled with really advanced hardware, and you'd buy it from vendors like Oracle or name your favorite enterprise vendor that could sell you a full stack. Today, as most Airbyte users know, we consume most of this in the cloud. And so you're either buying it from Snowflake, you're doing Redshift, maybe you're doing something on Google Cloud or Azure, or whatever you have it. And so the needs to get data into these data warehouses is changing. Also, what the cloud is allowing you to do is just consume it elastically. So specifically, a decade ago, when you wanted to buy a data warehouse, you'd procure it a year or two in advance. You'd buy some kind of capacity. You'd have to think about how much storage you needed, how much compute you needed. If you wanted the data to be quote unquote live or cold, etc. That's all sort of going out the window. And what's happening and what's transforming right in front of our eyes is the warehouse is becoming a central force where companies have decided, we're going to move a lot of it there. And from there, we're going to learn about what's going on in our company. And so, perhaps a decade ago, we saw this huge explosion of data, both in sort of velocity, variety, and volume. We're sort of in the second phase of that, where really we've gone through that phase and those trends still persist, but now it's largely being dominated by sort of a wave where we're all consolidating onto the warehouse. It's super interesting.
And what do you think about, so we're talking about the data warehouse, but what about the data lake and lake house? Are you all in the same bucket, or are you differentiating them?
Yeah, it's super interesting. I think the shape of the data is what's really fascinating about whatever terminology you want to assign to it. I think the structured data side of the world, you're seeing from a business perspective really mature. Like the businesses built on top of structured data are really interesting already. I think what's next, as we all know, and what we're hearing from customers is, okay, great. Now I've got a sense of all of my structured data. Now I have a lot of unstructured data. And so what happens here? I think the part of this next phase that's particularly interesting is serverless and separation of compute and storage is particularly interesting as we get into unstructured data. And what the cloud unlocks here, specifically around the amount of money you can save processing unstructured data in the cloud when you can disaggregate storage and compute. So these are all sort of like parallel trends or perhaps part of the same trend. It's really explosive. And what we're hearing from customers over and over again is these are present problems. Like these are problems that people are dealing with today. And the sort of spend against this is available today.
Okay, very, very interesting. And apart from warehousing, what else has really surprised you in the industry?
I think the speed at which customers broadly are aggregating all of their data into, call it a lake house, a warehouse, whatever, and all the types of data they're aggregating into a central location is really fascinating. So we all know that enterprise software goes through unbundling and bundling. And we'll talk about this in a minute with the data stack itself unbundling. But what is happening in terms of bundling is that we're bundling in terms of where it's all ending up. So, we've had this explosion of SaaS applications, we've had this explosion of databases, we've had an explosion of infrastructure. And so data now inside of a let's say Fortune 500 or Global 1000 company is really dispersed across multiple vendors, whether it's like infrastructure vendors or application vendors, et cetera. And so now that it's become so fragmented and siloed, anybody that's bringing all that data together is offering a huge value proposition. And so we're seeing this sort of current phase where the speed at which enterprises are accepting this idea of pulling all this data together in a central location and the value they're getting out of it, that's really surprising to me. If you just look at the different waves of enterprise software spend, this specific wave is perhaps the fastest and most ferocious that you've seen in a long time. I mean, you don't have to look further than sort of like the publicly available information about Snowflake. They're, as of last quarter, something like $1.9 billion of revenue run rate on their product revenue and still growing north of 80%. Those are really, really big numbers. And, obviously we don't know Redshift numbers, we don't know BigQuery numbers, and we don't know Azure's numbers here. And we don't know Databricks numbers either. But, aggregate all of that together and the growth rates that they all seem to be seeing, it's remarkable how fast this is moving. And I think that has been the most surprising to me. The scale and speed at which this market is moving is really fascinating and surprising to me.
And going back to your mention of bundling and unbundling, when you look at the modern data stack and its recent unbundling, what is your read about this?
Yeah, I think that ultimately the main thing that matters more than anything else is what value do customers perceive out of this? I think from sort of like different waves of enterprise software history, the one thing that's clear is that having too many vendors to deal with is something that enterprises certainly don't enjoy. And with good reason. So the larger the enterprise, or perhaps the more sensitive the data, sort of having multiple vendors being parties to all of your data flow is concerning. So things like security and privacy and compliance all become top of mind to large companies, and especially when they're consuming all of this across multiple vendors. So naturally, what we've seen is that companies want to buy more than one product from a trusted vendor. So they want a vendor that they have a relationship with, that they can establish trust with, that they can establish sort of like a relationship where the vendor really understands the things that they're trying to solve, and then go to that vendor to solve multiple problems. That's something that we've seen over and over again. I think what's really interesting is this is a move now away from what's persisted for the last decade, which has been companies really interested in buying best-in-class products across the stack, saying, I want to optimize here, I want to optimize here, I want to optimize here. I think while the data warehouse market and the data market itself is exploding, I think we also have to be conscious of the broader macroeconomic trends. Whether, who knows if the public stock market is the best indicator of that or not. What we do know is that there is an overall slowing of IT spend, at least the growth of it. So perhaps it's still growing, but it's just growing at a slower rate. Now, if you just take that into consideration, optimizing across every point of a stack when companies are looking to rein in budgets, or at least looking to rein in how fast those budgets grow, isn't necessarily top of mind. They want to get the job done versus trying to get the job done by picking the best-in-class vendor at each point. So I think in this phase of bundling and unbundling, there's sort of cross currents here that we're seeing in the warehouse market where there is drive from the customer to bundle. There's drive from entrepreneurs and startups to unbundle. I think it'll be really interesting to see how this all plays out. But I think over and over again, what ends up happening is that the companies that provide clear value, that provide real ROI, that are able to define to their customers, here are the specific problems I solve for you. And for example, I'm giving you 10x ROI on what you spend on my solution. Those companies will win over time. And I think that's the main thing that we're seeing today is this cross current where customers are pushing to buy multiple points of solutions from the same vendor. And I think entrepreneurs in general and startups in general pushing for the unbundling. I think if you just see everything around the modern data stack, it's this, right? Let's unbundle every single component of it. And now then the next part of it is like, what do customers want to do? What do customers accept? Do customers really want 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 points of the stack that they want to stitch together and have each part of the stack talk to the other part of the stack? Or do they want to buy some kind of bundled offering? Do they want to sort of solve each problem as it gets there? Will it be more incremental? Will it be all at once? These are all questions that are super open right now that we don't have definitive answers to. We have hypotheses, but we don't have definitive answers.
Yeah, we see a lot of drive from the customers on our end at Airbyte for bundling, typically like data movement, ELT and reverse TL typically. Right. And on that point, do you have some opinion on what would potentially get bundled and what would stay unbundled?
Yeah, I think the way we think about it at Airbyte is perhaps one thing to dig in more into, which is if you think about the overall warehouse industry and how fast it's growing, the main problem everybody has at the very beginning, once they buy a warehouse or decide to go with a warehouse or a lake or whatever, is they got to get data into it. And, you know, we want to be the one place where they can get all of their data, regardless of source, into wherever they're trying to get it into. And I think that proposition is very clear, which is you have data and you need to end up somewhere. We want to solve that job for you. We don't go to the customer and tell them, you got to consume 6 points to get that job done. You don't have to consume solutions from 6 different vendors to get that job done. We just say, hey, we can get that done for you. And here it is. And we'll get it done for you. And then it's up to you on how you want to do it. You can use our open source product, you can use our cloud product, you can use, you know, I don't want to tease products that we have coming out, but depending on where you are and how you want to consume our product, we're going to meet you there. And so we, you know, think about a job to be done, and then we offer a solution for that job. I think more and more, just as the microclimate gets a bit bumpy, customers are going to come to vendors with jobs to be done. And if you can articulate what job you're going to get done, it will feel more bundled than unbundled. When we go to customers and say, hey, we're going to help you get data in to whatever you need to get it into, that is literally saying, we'll do all of it. We'll take care of that job. And so that specifically from what we're hearing from customers is a bundled experience. And so maybe that's sort of counterintuitive at the moment, but that certainly seems to be what customers want.
I feel like in 5 or 10 years from now, people will think of that era as a specific era in time.
Yeah, that's right.
So we'll see. And with all that banding and bundling, that means also opportunities. So for entrepreneurs, where do you think are the emerging opportunities in the field?
Yeah, I think there's two ways to answer this question. One, I think, let's look at it from an open source perspective, and then second, let's look at broader sort of macro perspectives of what are opportunities available in the data space. From an open source perspective, I think the success of Airbyte proves today that there's a lot of opportunity in the data space for open source companies to come in and really disrupt the space. I think what we're seeing in the tens of thousands of companies that are adopting Airbyte and using it in production, and as fast as they've done it, is just showing that there's a huge pull and desire from customers to consume open source tools in the data market. I think the other part of it that's really fascinating to me is, of course, there is a non-open source vendor in our market. And from the best we can tell, nearly all of that closed vendors' customers use Airbyte. And so that's the other part that seems to be interesting to me, is that customers not only are going to pick sort of one solution, especially if it's closed source, they're going to want a solution that helps them move very, very quickly. And over again, in my experience in open source, is open source ultimately helps drive developer productivity. Specifically, with an open source project that's, especially in the infrastructure world, you can get going really fast. You can download it, you can put it in place, you can load some data, especially with Airbyte, you can see how it's going. And without talking to anybody, filling out any form, you can try it and you can start moving data around and get a feel for the product experience is going to be like very, very quickly. That very specific experience point that we offer as an open source product is hugely differentiating. And if you look across the data landscape today, there's multiple opportunities for entrepreneurs to think about what open source products can address large swaths of the data market that are dominated by proprietary vendors today. Because as this data market in general explodes, there's going to be a lot of companies that want to be able to consume solutions that increase their agility, that increase their velocity and productivity. So that's one part of the opportunity set that's fairly clear. I think the second part of the opportunity set that's becoming more and more clear is there seems to be a pull from customers for vertical specific solutions. So I think there's a lot of opportunity in the data space for entrepreneurs to build vertical specific solutions. We've seen this, especially in the SaaS world, around healthcare. So for example, Viva is a CRM specifically for a vertical. We've seen other companies like Benchling, which is a vertical SaaS company. We've seen multiple vertical SaaS companies that take either a platform and extend it vertically, or take a solution and build very specifically against a problem. I think in the data world, there is a lot of pull, and we certainly see it, from very specific verticals, where a vertical specific solution built on top of a broad-based data warehousing platform seems to have a lot of promise. Certainly, there are a lot of customers that want it, especially as regulatory and compliance overhangs in these specific verticals get even more complex, and data sensitivity, where data resides, how data moves, all of that becomes more and more complex. I think there's a ton of opportunity for entrepreneurs to take this horizontal data market and build really interesting vertical solutions and vertical applications against that horizontal market.
And I believe that Snowflake changed their territory to be verticals now, like in the last 2 years, exactly for these reasons, to address those verticals better.
Yeah.
I believe we are on time, so thank you very much, Chetan, and this was very insightful. The next few years will be definitely very interesting to see and participate in. So thank you again, Chetan, for all this.
Thank you for having me.